Well, thank you, Lan, and thank you everyone for organizing this fabulous interdisciplinary discussion. I think Ellen's presentation really touched the issue of how we learn things at the periphery, and when two cells that had been thought of separately are brought together, we understand how they co-evolved and they influence each other and create something much larger at a bigger scale. I'm going to sort of up the magnitude of scale here and talk about two larger scale processes, these general processes of cognition and attention, and also these sort of more what we traditionally thought of as more bottom-up processes of balance and postural control. And in the spirit of this presentation is talk about what happens when we start to look at those together. There's a clear movement in traditional medicine and about looking at the interdependence of these. And I think what we want to do here is bring in what some other things from the periphery, in this case the study of Tai Chi, does to help understand the therapeutic value of these for these processes, but also as almost like a probe. How does it help us understand the interconnectivity? So I hope that's in line with what we're trying to accomplish today. So I have to announce my disclosure that I'm also a practitioner of Tai Chi. So I think everyone here really appreciates what's happened in about the last 100 years in medicine, the specialization. If you have a cardiovascular issue, you want to go to a cardiologist that spends all their time understanding what's happening at the forefront of that field. And similarly for neurology, and if you're doing neurology research, you want to understand people focusing more and more on individual neurons that are relevant to your condition. So we appreciate that specialization. But I also think that there's side effects that we all appreciate to this reductionistic model. And that's the fragmentation of the body into parts and the fragmentation into the care that we have and our whole healthcare system. To use a metaphor from my old days in ecology and evolutionary biology, sometimes we're not seeing the forest for the trees. And so at the Osher Center at the Harvard Medical School, we think of integrative medicine in a very broad way. We sort of redefined it and co-opted it. It's not so much having an acupuncturist alongside a neurologist in a pain clinic or a meditation teacher alongside someone in a stress clinic, but it's really about how do we understand the interdependence between the systems and how do we bring therapies that help connect those systems, make the person whole, and with that wholeness and interconnectivity, give them resilience and health. And I think this is going to set up a little bit of what Narunda is going to talk about as well in his talk of Ayurveda. I think that idea is really nicely depicted in this diagram from a book on Chinese medicine, where on the right, the goal of Chinese doctors and Chinese medicine is to treat the body as an ecosystem and to keep all the pieces connected. We don't want any one element in the ecosystem to dominate. And through that interdependence, there's synergistic processes, resilience, and somewhat redundancy. And this is obviously a polemic and an extreme example here, but at the opposite extreme in reductionistic thinking in medicine and science, the body's thought of as a series of independent parts with very little interdependence and synergy. And I'll come back to this again if there's time at the end and talk a little bit about how we're stealing from complexity theory and metrics of nonlinear dynamics to actually characterize the health of the whole system using these quantitative tools. So what I wanted to do is just say a little bit about Tai Chi as a mind-body exercise. It really is at that interface of connecting these two large constructs as a therapeutic intervention, but also an interesting probing tool. And then illustrate that using some work around postural control. A lot of the Tai Chi research in recent years has focused on balance. So I'll say something about what we know about falls, but then this interface, where does emotion impact falls? How does Tai Chi do that? Where does attention and cognition, especially executive function, impact things? And then also some work we're using a dual task paradigm to look at whether Tai Chi enhances that interconnectivity. And again, if there's a little time at the end, a little bit about our work with physicists and complexity measures. So just, I'm guessing most of you have seen Tai Chi in the park here or somewhere, but just it's often good to start with a definition. But as you know, it's a mind-body exercise. It has its roots in a lot of different traditions, in martial arts and philosophy and medicine. And the training integrates these slow, repetitive movements with some breathing exercises, but importantly for this talk, a series of cognitive skills. And that might be heightened mental focus, acute body awareness, and imagery. And some of that heightened attention may even get into the sense of somatosensation and some of the perception that Ellen talked about. And the goals are to strengthen the body, integrate mind and body, and through that improve health, personal awareness, and Tai Chi is also martial art. So I think the idea of Tai Chi as a multi-component intervention is illustrated in this cartoon. And what it really is like a multi-drug therapy, to use an analogy from Western medicine. We started getting really interesting results in our first trials with heart failure, and my colleagues would say, is this just placebo, or what's the active ingredient? And as someone who came out of ecology and evolutionary biology, I was like, do we only get to pick one? So we came up with this mandala that sort of characterizes what we think are the therapeutic components. Each of these has had quite a bit of research in some aspect of medicine, not necessarily specifically with Tai Chi, but it gives you an idea of the processes that someone who's learning this is exposed to. So we know it's weight bearing, and there's musculoskeletal training going on, strength, flexibility. We're not just interested in individual parts, but how do these link together with synergies and biomechanical processes. I'll say more about this in terms of cognition, but a great deal of, it's almost like mindfulness on wheels. You know, we're really paying attention to parts, paying attention to interoceptive processes, and there's a great deal of imagery used. Feel like a tree, feel grounded, float like a cloud, and we know that these images have huge impacts on our neurophysiology. We have a big placebo research program, and intention and belief loads highly in our physiology. Breathing patterns are important. Being in a group is highly important. And philosophy and ritual. You know, maybe do a little bit less. Less could be more. Go with the flow. These ideas that are woven into class actually impact how people feel and perceive and pursue their health. Oops. And just to give you an idea of how this sort of systems model plays out, there's quite a bit of research on Tai Chi and falls, and there's some big Cochrane reviews that sort of are very conservative meta-analyses. The average right now from a large number of trials suggests that there's about a 30% reduction in risks of falls in older adults who practice Tai Chi. And these are important issues I'll say something about in a minute. But just to give you an idea, these are some of the key risk factors that a gerontologist might be interested in that lead to heightened falls. And each one of these has been demonstrated in robust randomized trials to be changed by Tai Chi. We change lower extremity strength, that's obvious. Sensory deficits, just to link to Ellen's work, I'll show you a slide later. We've done some work with peripheral neuropathy, and we've shown that plantar sensation changes. If you have loss of sensation in the soles of your feet, you can adapt quickly. There's also changes in tactile acuity, and also where your joints are in space has been experimentally shown to be improved. Neuromuscular coordination, not time to show these fun experiments. Some people on treadmills where the treadmill is pulled out of the way experimentally, and how people respond in terms of the speed and the sequence of muscle neural firings seems to be more adaptive in Tai Chi, so it gives them this resilience. I'll say more about this as we go along in terms of the cognitive pieces, and it seems to enhance overall physical activity, makes people more confident, and it reduces a number of pain conditions. And pain itself is a predictor of falls because people are distracted and kinesiophobic and guarding their movements. Okay? So you get the idea. This is really the take-home message, is that when we put it all together, we're looking at these complex interventions. My guess is many of the Ayurvedic interventions, not just the herb components are complex, but maybe that and lifestyle and diet and meditation are very different than studying an isolated active ingredient and looking at a specific target in Western medicine. I don't think it's better or worse. I think there's a top-down and bottom-up, and we need to look at things from both ends. I want to say why I'm focusing on falls here in dementia, because I think almost everyone here knows how these are really growing epidemics in our society. 1 out of 3 older adults over the age of 65 fall each year. 1 out of 5 of those with a fracture will die just due to the sequelae, not the trauma, but the lifestyle changes that go with that. And the costs of society are remarkable and growing as this boomer population that we live in is expanding. And the statistics on dementia are even more scary and remarkable. So these are really bread and butter issues that we really need to go after. And there's a gerontologist here who's going to start doing some Tai Chi research. I can see him nodding his head, George, from Columbia Medical School. So we've been thinking about these issues quite isolated in silos. People who have lower extremity issues or balance problems are often told to do a little bit of strength work, a little flexibility, a little agility, some aerobics, and it's really a bottom up, right? People who have cognitive issues are told to do cognitive training, learn do Sudoku puzzles, learn languages, things like that. But we know that even the most fundamental things like walking now really are these highly complex cognitive motor top-down, bottom-up things. Okay? And there's a really rich literature on this, and I won't say too much about it, but what it shows is that even people who have completely intact cognition, but maybe a modest deficit in executive function, that part of cognition that's the executive. It says, pay attention to this and don't pay attention to that. That modest deficits in executive function result in about a 30+% increase in falls when everything else is controlled for. So something up here, so to speak, this cognitive structure impacts balance. What's also interesting is how you move greatly predicts your risk of dementia over time, so that even walking speed is actually a better predictor than if you tell someone you have, I'm starting to be forgetful, but there's something called the motor cognitive risk syndrome, which is really popular now. It's well studied, but that your walking speed at time 1 predicts better than your ability to remember things at time 1, whether or not you're going to have dementia many years from now. And it's not just the speed, but the agility. So there's this two-way street that's out there. And I think that just sets up this nice place for tools like mind-body exercises that were really evolved and designed to link these processes. They may be more effective than these elements. So I just want to say a few things to illustrate this. Fear of falling is very obvious. If you have had a colleague or friend or parent who's had a fall, they walk in a very guarded way. In Tai Chi lingo or Chinese medicine, their chi has risen, so to speak. They hold their breath, they're fearful, they're distracted. That's ironically one of the biggest predictors of falls. People who have fear of falling, and there's good measures of this fear of falling process. Fear of falling predicts falls. And so what happens is you get fearful of falls, you start doing less activity, you start socializing less, you get a little more deconditioned. That actually makes you more fearful because you have less steadiness, and it's this vicious cycle, and it's hard to break, right? And so one of the things Tai Chi has done is and there's some nice studies that have looked at whether fear of falling is mediating these reductions in falls, and it is. That construct is improved a lot. And some of the things that might happen in a Tai Chi class is, in fact, one of my primary advisor, who's a very famous scientist, but because of HIPAA violations, I won't mention her name, just fractured her leg in 3 places. She's been this incredibly rocket scientist, very senior, and I'm watching her walk. And even though we've worked on Tai Chi studies together, she's never done Tai Chi. So I was at her house the other day, and I said, would you let me do 3 minutes with you? And it's the simplest things. It's, can you feel your feet on the ground? Can you feel like you're made of liquid and pouring? Are you breathing? And all of those just take you away from this fear of falling deer in the headlight phase into something in your body a little bit more grounded. And they're very simple things you can do. So that just gives you an idea why that's happening. People who come in very deconditioned, whether it's in a balance study, people who fall, we work with Parkinson's disease, we work with heart failure, are often afraid of exercising. And in addition to this fear of falling, there's a broader construct of exercise self-efficacy. And just by getting more confident, they start to feel like they can do other things. And so this exercise self-efficacy is a really important outcome from our research. It's this behavioral motor interaction piece. And we've been starting to call Tai Chi and related things like gateway exercises. They just make people more confident to explore other things. We've done a little bit of work in our lab. We have a couple trials. This is an older review we did looking at whether this slow-moving exercise actually can change cognition. We know that walking fast on a treadmill activates brain-derived neurotropic factors and all sorts of things, but no one had looked at these sort of mind-body exercises. This early review was supportive, and there's a couple new ones out there suggesting that Tai Chi can help with, especially with executive function. Not surprising, there's a lot of multitasking going on and attention shifting, but also with global cognitive impairment. This is where I just wanted to focus some of the experimental work. How do you actually study this? So I wanted to pick a study that was an interesting design about cognitive motor interactions. And this is what we call a hybrid design, because some of the aspects of Tai Chi are cultivated over many, many years. And it's hard to study something for the 12 weeks of funding or 6 months of funding you get in an NIH trial. So what we looked at was a group of Tai Chi experts in the Boston area. These experts had about 25 years of training, right? Diverse group. And we matched them to 60 age and gender matched healthy controls. And we said, let's compare these groups. If Tai Chi is going to do anything for our outcomes that we're interested in, we better see it after 25 years of training, right? And then what happens if you take these Tai Chi naive people and then you put them in a typical randomized trial? Are the short-term effects you see here moving in the same direction as the effects you see here? So it's like a hybrid clinical trial. And we can measure footsteps. Speed is important. A better discriminator of performance is what's called gait variability. And some variability in medicine is good. So heart rate variability is good. Gait variability here is bad. So if someone's walking 1, 2, 1, 2 very regularly, that's good. If they start to stutter, the extreme of that would be like freezing of gait in Parkinson's. That means that their cadence and some higher level gait processes are not healthy. So we've been looking at this because it's a good predictor of falls in general, but also in some of the populations we're studying like Parkinson's. And this pretty much gives you a sense of what we see when you challenge someone while they're walking with a cognitive task. It's the same woman, and she's walking at a faster speed and a more regular speed than down here. You can see that while she's counting backwards, in this case by threes, she's an elderly woman, she's going slower and her steps are less regular. And the question we're asking is, if she studies Tai Chi, while she's counting, can she still do this? Can we get rid of that cost of the distraction and enhance that mind-body connection? Right? And the short answer is yes. So these are the long-term comparisons. This is a measure of stride time variability. Lower is better, and the experts have much lower stride time variability under this cognitive task. And here you can see the short-term changes are moving in the same direction. We can also bring people into the laboratory. I just want to show you a fun little clip here. And we can look at their movements, and we can look at whether their balance while they're standing still is challenged by these tasks. Here's the variability moving forward and back on a fourth platform without counting, with counting. So this is the distraction. That difference is the cost, and we can see that the effects of Tai Chi reduces those costs in this typical measure that predicts falls. There's some neuroimaging data that some of the neurologists might be interested in contrast to meditation and acupuncture, where there's actually quite a rich body of neuroimaging data, and there's almost nothing on Tai Chi. There's a couple studies. This is a resting state study showing that some of the networks that are associated with cognition in a small randomized trial do improve. Okay, I just want to say very briefly that so we're interested in these whole systems interactions. How do you measure them? And one way to think about it is to steal from some tools of complexity theory. This is someone standing on one of those forced platforms over time, and there's a lot of variation here. In this case, variation is good. If they were rigor mortis, it'd be a straight line. And there's a lot of variation, even though they're standing still, because they're breathing, there's fatigue, there's neural firing going on, vestibular issues, visual, who knows what. But that richness means all systems are awake and interacting and creating a richness. And as we age, all of those systems dampen and the complexity goes down. So there's some theory to suggest that the complexity of any signal reflects the whole, and we've been using some of those. And we've seen that, and this is a study that links a little bit to Ellen's talk, looking at peripheral neuropathy in Tai Chi. It's a very small study, only about 40 people. And what we found is over a short period of time, the plantar sensation improved following Tai Chi. And that improvement, that enhanced signal input into dynamics, actually improved the complexity of the sway. Okay. And we've also, one of my postdocs, Brad Manor, has been looking at transcranial direct current stimulation and hitting the left prefrontal cortex where executive function sort of hangs out. Just for 20 minutes actually increases the complexity when they're counting backwards. Okay? So just to put it all together, I think what I've tried to do really quickly is just say something about Tai Chi being a promising intervention for enhancing many aspects of health, here focusing on postural control and cognition. And I think it's partly the multimodal nature of Tai Chi that may afford advantages over more unimodal approaches to health and exercise. But what I didn't mention is it's really hard to study this compared to a pill. These are very complex interventions. You need to be careful about how you interpret things. Cognitive motor interactions like the ones we've talked about challenge more reductionist models. They support a systems perspective and maybe a special value for complex interventions. And we need really innovative designs that go all the way down from the bench level. This is some work on fibroblasts that my colleague in our group works on in terms of stretch signals, all the way up to some of the work we're doing on is this actually cost effective? So we really need to look along the translational spectrum. I don't have time to thank everyone. I'm part of a team. My job is to herd cats and bring everyone together, but a lot of people help make our work done. NIH supports it. And